and welcome to Trade Finance Talks. My name is Brian Canup, Assistant Editor at Trade Finance Global. And today we're here to talk about the EBRD and all the work they are doing throughout their regions. Specifically, this year is the 33rd EBRD annual meeting and business forum in Yerevan, Armenia, where the industry members from across the world will be discussing sustainable finance, changing macroeconomic landscapes, digitalization, and increasing financial inclusion. But I want to jump straight into the interview today, and I'm honored to have Francis Malige, Managing Director, Financial Institutions, EBRD, as our guest today. Francis, welcome to Trade Finance Talks.
Thank you, Brian, for having me. I'm very happy to be with you. You've introduced me, so I'm not going to repeat. Just to say that in this role as the Managing Director for Financial Institutions, I oversee the business for FI across 36 countries where we invest, ensuring that it's aligned with the bank's mission, which is to promote sustainable development and transition in our countries of operation. So we are a development bank.
Great. Well, thanks for that brief introduction, and let's get into the meat of the interview here. So can you elaborate on EBRD's trade facilitation program and its significance, especially in the current global economic climate?
But it is actually increasingly important to have international financial institutions support trade in our regions, especially as the commercial variety of it is getting challenged more and more by geopolitical context and sometimes by crisis as well. We saw, for example, during the COVID crisis that we played a very important role as a counter-cyclical investor into the trade finance to keep the wheels of trade running, to be honest. So the trade facilitation program works to facilitate international trade within the EBRD regions and with the broader world. We provide guarantee to international commercial banks covering political and commercial payment risks for transactions conducted by issuing banks in EBRD countries. So the issuing banks need to be in EBRD countries. The confirming banks can be anywhere in the world. In addition, we also offer short-term loans, cash loans to selected banks and factoring companies in these regions to support trade-related financing needs for local companies, be they importers or exporters. Currently, we collaborate with over 100 issuing banks across 26 EBRD countries out of the 36 that we cover, along with over 800 confirming banks globally. Annual TFP limits typically exceed 3 billion euros. The program is designed and plays a role in fostering economic growth and stability amidst the complexity of the current disrupted supply chain by providing guarantees and financing to support especially medium-sized transactions. We enhance access to trade finance, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises. And so this is a program that's now 25 years old and has found its spot as a key element of integration of our countries into the global world.
That's an amazing number, seeing 100 issuing banks, 26 countries, and 800 confirming banks globally. And that leads me very nicely into the next question. With reach of nearly 900 banks around the world, one of the biggest issues we're seeing is sustainability and green finance. And so with that type of reach the EBRD has, how can trade finance and especially the EBRD help facilitate the greening of the global economy?
Well, obviously, trade is often associated with pollution in terms of transport and so on, and that is true. And progress needs to be made there, obviously, in, for example, greening the fuel for ships. But more importantly, the way we see it as EBRD is that a lot of the green technologies are not native to our countries of operation. And so by bringing green technologies through trade into these countries, we contribute quite significantly to reducing the CO2 footprint of our own countries. So, for example, by importing wind equipment or other, by the way, it's not just about the emissions, it's also about sustainability of use of resources in general. So, for example, water treatment equipment and so on. A lot of these need to be traded across borders to be able to be installed and then to work in our countries. And so trade finance plays a role. We also incentivize environmentally friendly business practices and investments by working with our partner banks and to both reduce, again, the carbon footprint and promoting sustainable practices with all of our banks.
Thank you very much, Francis. And I guess my next point would be talking about, access to finance. So improving access to finance is crucial for sustained development. And so how is the EBRD innovating to address issues around economic inclusion, particularly in the context of the TFP?
Well, so, economic inclusion has many dimensions. Obviously, it is at the heart of the EBRD's mandate. And for example, when we work with partner banks to facilitate access to finance for SMEs, it's one of the many ways in which we foster inclusion. But it's also a question of which countries have actually access to trade. And there we have seen over the past few years, actually over the past decades now, a tendency to reduce the connectivity of the global financial system through what banks call de-risking, which essentially means removing linkages to banks in essentially smaller markets that don't really make sense to onboard or to maintain as relationships. And that creates issues, especially for the smaller economies in EBRD countries of operations. So, and if you don't have correspondent banking relationship, then you cannot have trade, because if you can't, send dollars around, then you can't also, you can finance trade. So we have developed partnerships with bodies like the International Compliance Association in London, ACAMS in the United States, to enhance the compliance capabilities of our partner banks, support them in meeting the increasing compliance requirements of international commercial banks, for example. And we are leveraging the TFP confirming bank network and global sets of partnerships to integrate our partner banks in a better way into the TFP network. We help our partner banks essentially in our countries of operation expand their trade finance operations. There's a lot of countries out there where, in fact, a lot of entrepreneurs do not have recourse to trade finance. They when they want to export, they send the goods and then pray that the money comes in, essentially. So it's kind of it's not the trade finance model as we experience it. It's the pay and pray model. Or they send the money and then they pray that the goods arrive. Which is the flip side of the coin. And so by encouraging and helping clients in those countries to see the value of trade finance instruments, what we also do is we increase the size of the opportunity, because obviously with a larger volume of trade finance, it makes it more interesting and more attractive for commercial banks in the world to develop a partnership with these smaller banks in our more remote economies. So we have some large economies and some of the more remote economies, and we play a role in both of those. In the larger economies, it's also a question of increasing the limits and therefore the capacities. Very often what we see is large banks in our countries of operations are good risks and so on, but everyone has a risk appetite for these banks. And so we help supplement that risk appetite by providing additional guarantees to their international partners.
Great, Francis. I really appreciate how much detail you went into with that answer. I think that will really help all of our readers understand EBRD's view on access to finance and financial inclusion. And now we're going to flip a bit to the digitalization side of things. So digitalization and technology are pivotal in today's economy, and it's ever increasingly becoming so. So how is the EBRD embracing these technological changes in order to foster economic development?
Well, first, we recognize that digitalization is one of the priorities in today's world. In fact, in EBRD strategy, we have three priorities: greening the economy, making them more inclusive, and making them more digital. And digitalization actually underpins the other two dimensions as well. It's also especially important because we work on economies that are typically not the first recipients of investments when it comes to digital investments. And therefore, there is a risk that the gap between the economies where we work and the advanced economies of the world actually grows instead of reduces. And our mandate is to reduce this gap. So we've embraced digitalization with trade, and trade has a lot of initiatives and a lot of startups looking at digitalizing trade. It's not always been very successful because the trade is a very complex field to digitalize, but we are making progress working with some of the platforms out there and with our partner banks. It's also important that we lead our banks in our countries to digitalize. for things like precisely KYC that we were discussing earlier, but also to support their clients through digital onboarding and so on. It is also quite important. And I must say, there I see examples of banks in our region that are embracing digitalization in places you wouldn't necessarily suspect to see it, and that's very encouraging.
Thank you. And embracing and enhancing digitalization is very difficult. And as you mentioned, trade is specifically difficult to digitalize. And so that means that collaboration is especially vital to the success of large-scale financial programs. So at the EBRD TFP, how do you ensure that you're collaborating with the right partners and stakeholders in order to facilitate trade and support economies, especially during times of crises, which the world has seen quite a lot in the past couple of years?
Yes, so look, I think we have several significant partnerships in EBRD, and especially for the trade finance program, because trade is about interconnection, and so there's a number of bodies that are working on trade, and we are linked into those bodies. We work very closely with a diverse range of international partners, such as the International Chambers of Commerce, with whom we've developed training programs, the World Trade Organization, as well as sister IFIs like the IFC or the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, that have their own trade finance program. That actually we shared the technology of the trade finance program with these institutions when we created it. And so there's a very, very fluid cooperation. We also work, of course, with international commercial banks and industry associations such as the International Compliance Association that I just mentioned, as well as local banking associations. So these collaborations, of course, add a layer of complexity, but they're also essential to ensure that our initiatives are strategically aligned and effectively implemented. And only through dialogue, cooperation, and knowledge sharing can we attain the synergies that will help to amplify our efforts. And just to be a bit more concrete in terms of giving you a few examples, especially in crisis, trade needs to be swift and flexible. And for example, when appropriate, we have not hesitated to extend the tenor of our guarantees. For example, when it came to imports of heavy equipment from China into Albania recently, or exports of services from Greece into Spain, where due to crisis, due to transport disruptions, shipments had been delayed or projects had been put on hold. We've also developed a focus that starting from the pandemic of supporting the medical supply chain, not necessarily for vaccines, but for example, imports of ambulances from Portugal into Morocco, medicines from Turkey into Georgia, from Switzerland into Jordan, and from Spain into Lebanon. And Lebanon is a case in point, which is a very difficult situation in terms of the banking sector right now and the financial situation of the country. But the trade finance program remains up and running for the benefit of the Lebanese population.
I think with all of the events and how quickly things change in the current world, I think it's incredible that the EBRD and specifically EBRD TFP can act so quickly and help people who need it in the moment. So I applaud all the efforts that I know you and your team do to keep that up and running. And you were mentioning the ICC and the training programs that you've developed with them. And that kind of brings us to the next point, which is forward-looking and looking to the next generation of leaders in the trade finance world. What advice would you give to emerging leaders within FIs, and especially those who are looking to make significant impacts in regions facing economic and environmental challenges?
That's a very good question. Look, first I would say trade is a key driver of economic development. A lot of people see the local industrial base as a key strength, and it's true that when you have comparative advantages, you should invest in them. But trade is a way to complement and augment that success. So people who want to focus on trade, first, I think they are welcome. Second, I think they should realize that it is going to become, for a number of them, almost a vocation for life. I see a lot of people that have spent very fulfilling careers doing trade, and enjoyed it and found it also good for them. And EBRD will continue providing the sort of training and the sort of community building that we've been providing to our region in the past few decades for many more years to come. It's actually very, very important. Trade is not just about sending messages via SWIFT to one another. Our experience is that trades works even better when people who know one another physically, who have met, even if they live thousands of kilometers apart, but do business with one another and share the same language, the same basic concepts that they've learned in trainings. And that is why EBRD is investing so much into providing that knowledge into its region of operations. So for aspiring readers or aspiring trade practitioners, it's a fantastic field. You will enjoy it. Invest your time in it and become good specialists because you will enjoy every minute of it.
It can be an intimidating industry to break into, but I think, as you mentioned, as I've had some experience with as well, it's very rewarding, and the connections you make, everyone's really great in this industry, and they usually like to help you along. So completely agree with all of your points there, Francis. And last question for you, and it's again another forward-looking question, but maybe you can give some insights into our viewers here. What new initiatives or areas of focus does the EBRD have in your pipeline to kind of further support economies in its regions?
When we speak about the future initiatives, the EBRD priorities obviously are going to remain around the green agenda. Green is the priority of our times. It's clear every day we're seeing the news signs that some parts of our planet are under threat of becoming uninhabitable. So it is really the challenge of our times. And it is an area where EBRD has invested and will continue to invest massively in the coming years. I do expect that, of course, digitalisation is also going to be a very big theme. We have a new strategic exercise coming up, so these priorities are still being shaped, but clearly these themes, as well as inclusion, will remain central. When it comes to geographic areas, of course, Ukraine is the number one priority. The reconstruction of it and its support during the war, the trade finance program remained active without any interruption since the first day of the large-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine. We have supported medication for the population, fuel for farmers, seeds, and all sorts of essential goods going into the country. And we continue doing this. Recently, we facilitated also the import of fuel trucks and rail cars that are used now as transportation and temporary depots for the local population. The other area which is going to be a big focus is, of course, the new region of EBRD. We've been approved to grow into 6 countries of sub-Saharan Africa. All of them have applied to become members of EBRD: Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Senegal, and Benin, as well as Iraq. So we are also going to set up operations in those countries with a view to continuing to use banks as well as trade to support these priorities. And just a word on why banks are a priority. The banking sector I see always as the equivalent of the blood circulation system in the human body. That's what banks do in an economy. They carry the oxygen, the funding into the muscles that are the companies, the entrepreneurs. So if you can green the DNA of your blood, then you can green the entire body. And that's exactly what banks are going to be used for. Trade is at the forefront of this. We are going to continue incentivizing the trade of green projects, but also using trade as a way to integrate our soon-to-be 43 countries of operations with the wider world. And that is where the mission of EBRD is and the priorities in the next few years. Thank you very much.
Well, Francis, I really want to thank you for coming on today and giving us some insight into EBRD's work and really large reach across both geographically and also topics as well. So thank you for covering the green economy, digitalization, EBRD's expansion to Africa, touching on Ukraine. We really appreciate that. I know I personally can say, but I also know our readers, viewers, listeners can absolutely agree that anytime you go on the news in the past couple of months and really years, EBRD is all over the place and you guys are doing incredible work. So bravo to you and your team. And we're all really looking forward to seeing more and more news coming out of the EBRD, especially as we approach the 33rd EBRD annual meeting and business forum in Yerevan. I'm sure there'll be lots of more exciting news coming out of that meeting. So Francis, thank you very much for joining us on Trade Finance Talks.
Thank you for having me and looking forward to seeing you in Yerevan.